You ask for it again, and you keep asking for it. So here it is, a case with 200mm fans. Introducing, ladies and gentlemen, the Antec NX800, a mid-tower case that is a conglomeration of value and function. Well, how well do those 200mm fans function, you might ask? We'll find out right here, not tomorrow, not next week, right now, right here on Robeytech. Mid-tower gaming cases are a dime a dozen, let's just be honest. But ones that come with 200mm fan support up front are not. Sure, there are ones like the Cooler Master Mastercase H500P Mesh, the H500M ARGB, the Lee & Lee LandCool 215. Thermaltake has a few cases with front 200mm fan support, and lesser known ones like the GameMax Black Hole. I mean, but who's actually heard of that case? I know there's somebody in the back. Me, I heard of it. No one's talking to you. But after that, you start to run out of choices. Well, in comes the Antec NX800, an airflow case that is built for gaming and RGB. It also has a bevy of features in it, so let's take a look at what those are. It's coming in at around $90 USD. The Antec NX800 is one color, and that's black. It's made of a combination of steel and plastic, and the dimensions of the case are 470mm by 230mm by 500mm, which is about 20 inches tall, 9 inches wide, and 18.5 inches deep. So it fits right in that sweet spot of mid-tower cases and should look great on your desk. It's roughly the same size as the Lee & Lee LandCool 2 Mesh, and if you saw a review of that, then you'll know what I'm talking about. If not, check out the video on that right here. When looking at the side panels of the NX800, you'll notice that one side is like your typical tempered glass panel to show your build off, and the other is a solid panel to hide the cable management that I work way too hard on every single time. The front panel is a full mesh front panel with a unique design in it that makes it look a bit industrial with a modern, sleek twist. Top, front, and bottom also have dust filters that are removable, as do most cases, but good to see they didn't cheap out. Now the front panel I/O ports are not lacking with your typical power reset button, an LED control button, more on that in a second, separate audio and mic 3.5mm jacks, 2 USB 2 ports, 1 USB 3, both Type A. What's missing here is the USB Type C. Whether it would have been USB 3.1 or 3.2, we would have always liked to see a USB Type C port of some kind grace the front panel. I know, not every motherboard has that option, but just having it there gives you more choices for motherboards, which I think is always a bonus. Now the rear panel has 7 PCIe horizontal slots along with 3 PCI expansion slots for a vertically mounted GPU should you choose. Now as we open up the side panels of the Antec NX800 via the typical thumb screws, like in most cases, we see that the Antec NX800 comes with 3 fans. You have 2 200mm gigantic ARGB fans in the front and 1 itty-bitty 140mm, it's not really that small, ARGB fan in the rear. It's nice to have a case that comes with solid fans inside of it, and ARGB at that. At least that we think they're solid. We'll test more on thermals a little later on in the video. Now, how is the lighting control on those fans though? As we look at the cable management side, we notice that the Antec NX800 comes with a pre-installed LED controller with support for up to 6 fans for ARGB control. The ARGB controller is nice, although it's not encased like some we have seen. It's your typical open board controller and unfortunately proprietary connections, which is kind of lame. But it does allow you to control the lighting with that front panel LED button. There is also an optional motherboard sync header on it, so you can plug it into a 3-pin ARGB motherboard header. Now remember, 3-pin is ARGB and 4-pin is RGB, and you cannot interchange them. What's puzzling though is that on their website, it doesn't say anything about compatibility for things like Mystic Light or like ASRock's Polychrome Mesh or even AuraSync, as most of the ARGB or /RGB devices actually have some sort of claim that comes along with them. A little clearer definition from Antec would actually be nice. Inside the rear panel, you can see that it has spots for 4 different 2.5-inch SSDs. You've got your typical motherboard window, and under the PSU shroud looks spacious with support for 3.5-inch HDDs or 2.5-inch SSDs. It's convertible. And also, you can add up to a 200mm PSU, so lots of room there. A larger PSU with a hard drive cage in there will be tight in terms of cable management, so just be aware. I would have liked to have seen some cable routing tracks on the back, but I guess for 90 bucks, you get what you get. It has a few tie downs for cable management, and if you're the godfather of cable management, like me, you don't need much more. Now turning it around, you see that the Antec NX800 has motherboard support for mini ITX, micro ATX, ATX, and even eATX. And we're talking about real true support for eATX. So motherboards such as your MSI X570 Godlike or an AMD Threadripper TRX40 will fit and also be usable because it actually has cutouts for routing cables when you use an eATX motherboard, unlike the fractal case that we used in our $30,000 build, which did not. But why would you put an eATX or Threadripper in a $90 case? These are good questions. Now all of this and still no front panel USB-C? Now what's pretty nice is that it has GPU support for up to 350 millimeters. That means that most cards like your extremely beefy Gigabyte Aorus Master 3080, 3080 Ti, which we just built with a few streams ago, or the Asus ROG Strix 3090 will fit inside this case just fine. For CPU air cooler clearance, you have support for up to 180 millimeters. Air coolers such as the modern looking Cooler Master Master Air MA620M will fit, but if you're going for a more sleekish look on the air cooler, anyone under 180 millimeters will fit comfortably. But Robey, what if you don't want to go air cooler? What if you want to use an AIO or even custom water cool? Well, that's not a problem. The Antec NX800 has support for multiple variations of AIOs and radiators. The rear can go up to 140 millimeters, the top up to 280 millimeters, and the front has support up to 360 millimeters. The NX800 can support up to 6 fans. You can do 2 120 millimeter or 2 140 millimeters at the top. You can do 3 120 millimeter, 3 140 millimeter, or 2 200 millimeter with less than or equal 25 millimeter thickness at the front. In theory, you could, if you wanted to, do an all Corsair fan build inside this case. It does support it, no problem. But remember, the more ARGB fans that you have, and Corsair is ridiculous for this, the more you have to worry about cable management. And the fact that this case only has a few spots to tie down cables, you'll have to get super creative on the way that you cable management. All in all, it is a solid looking case for $90, but it looks like a $90 case. But I feel like there are actually better options out there with more features that are proven to be good, such as like the Lian Li LANcool 2 mesh, minus the 200 millimeter fan support, of course. But enough about the potential of this whole thing. Let's actually build inside of it and get a real opinion. Okay, let's talk about our CPU though. In this one, just because we're gonna put in the Ryzen 9 5900X. So we're gonna be using that ASRock B550 Taichi Razer edition. This is the Orion RGB AMD edition, 4000 megahertz. For our storage, we're using the Intel 670p. For our GPU, though it says out of stock, you can actually get one for close to retail price, and that's the MSI Gaming X Trio 6800 XT. We're gonna go ahead and do a air cooler. So we're gonna use the new Cooler Master Master Air MA612 Stealth ARGB. I'm also gonna be using their Cooler Master MWE Gold 850. Look at the size of the fans. But ow, look at that. There we go. There, whoa! So all in all, Robey, what did you think about building in this case? To be honest, it was fine. You get what you pay for. But some of the lack of what I might even consider bread and butter features like rubber grommets comes at a higher cost when trying to make your build look better. There's a lot of budget in this budget case, like super small holes for running front panel connections and like your GPU cables, etc., to really make things look polished. I also spent a good amount of time zipping up cables to ensure that they weren't visible because there were no grommets to hide things. So it means keeping cables in places where there are solid metal so you don't necessarily see the runs from the front. Now, if you wanted to switch RGB mechanisms, in other words, going from Antec to something like Corsair or something like that, I would also see a ton of problems, given that the back is relatively shallow. You also have a lot of wasted space at the top that is for that proprietary ARGB connection that you can't use for anything else. And hiding all of those cables so they aren't visible is going to be time consuming. I know, I actually built it. So I guess in short, I got a budget build experience with my budget case. But unfortunately, cases like the Montage NX800 kind of ruined what a budget build should feel like. And this feels cheaper than that. I mean, it looks like the reason for this is the 200mm fans, but let's see if the thermal performance was worth the cost everywhere else. So for thermals in our Antec NX800 in a slightly positive pressure configuration using stock Antec fans, they were as follows. We were using a Ryzen 9 5900X with a Cooler Master Master Air MA612 Stealth. Now we needed to test an air cooler right here because this is an air-cooled case and we're using big fans. So sitting in idle, we were a bit higher than we wanted to be off the bat, sitting at a warm but manageable 43 degrees in the open case scenario and a slightly higher 46 degrees in the closed case. Now when we cranked it up and ran AIDA64 for our stress test on the CPU, we saw that temps jump up to a warm but manageable 80 degrees in the open case scenario and a warmer but still fine 86 in the closed case. Now to be fair, I knew this was going to be a stretch for the capabilities of this Cooler Master air cooler, and I wanted to see just how much air those 200mm fans were going to feed to the cooler. These temps, though high, are really good given what this is cooling, and how this case is actually providing the air cooler with enough fresh air to keep that 5900X at bay. No thermal throttling here whatsoever. Now, onto the GPU side of things, it looks to be a little bit more in line with what we expected. At idle, we were seeing the GPU sitting at a nice and very frosty 29 degrees in the open case scenario, just 3 degrees off of ambient temperature, mind you, and a warmer 39 degrees in the closed case. Now, 10 degrees difference here is a little bit disappointing though. When we crank things up for our GPU stress test though, we see 68 degrees in the open case scenario and a jump up to 76 degrees in the closed case scenario. Now what this is showing is that more than likely, as effective as those 200mm fans are getting fresh air into the case, the warmer temps on the GPU are showing that getting the air out is not so good, which is why we're seeing higher temps in the closed case scenario. A more powerful exhaust fan would probably alleviate the issue, but to be honest, those temps are anything but concerning. But if you want to push or overclock your GPU in this case, you may want to consider changing out the rear fan for something like a M.2 NF series fan. So wrapping it all up, thermals in the case does a great job of getting cold air in, but there are some issues with the exhaust that could be fixed with better exhaust fans. This is going to be especially true if you're using a GPU that has a tendency to run hotter. For this configuration, the air color we choose is adequate, and if you aren't wanting to push the CPU, it would be just fine. And by the way, gaming temps aren't going to be anywhere near as hot as what we tested. However, if overclocking is in your future, then a larger capacity Be Quiet or Noctua air cooler is going to do much better here, especially if it's paired with a higher end exhaust fan. So thermals are okay. But let's talk about the build we built in the case and how it would perform if we put it through the gamut of game tests. First up, it's single-player NVIDIA-tuned experiences with an AMD Ryzen 9 5900X and an AMD Radeon RX 6800 XT. For Tomb Raider running at 1440p with no ray tracing on and the highest preset, we saw an average frame rate of 173 FPS across the runs that we did in the game. Now yes, this is high, but again, this is no RTX/ray tracing at all. For Metro Exodus running at 1440p, also running without any ray tracing support, we saw an average FPS of 43.87. Definitely showing that lack of optimization for AMD GPUs, given I expected this number to be much higher, specifically given there's no ray tracing of any sort. Now for some more tuned AMD experiences, because we wanted to show you what those would perform like as well. First up, we have Dirt 5 running at 1440p with ultra high graphic settings. We saw an average frame rate of 133.1, and more than good enough for any solid racing, and seeing that benefit of optimization for sure. Lastly, in rounding out the single player experiences was Borderlands 3 running at the highest graphical preset. We saw an FPS average of 117.53. Again solid, and again benefiting from the optimization. But let's talk about MP games. Well, for Apex Legends running on low visual settings at 1440p, again optimizing for competitive gameplay, which means maximum FPS, we saw an average frame rate of 142.3 FPS across all multiple game sessions. a little lower than I anticipated, to be honest. Finally, for Fortnite, again at 1440p, also in low visual settings and set for competitive play, crushing the 360 FPS barrier, coming in at a nice and fluid 419.8 FPS. Fantastic number, and actually a bit higher than I expected. So good numbers when gaming, but definitely seeing where AMD needs optimizations and how Nvidia benefits from having the majority of the market and getting a lot of performance for just being popular. Unfortunate, but hopefully as FSR and AMD GPUs become more prevalent, that gap will decrease more and more over time. So wrapping it all up, the Antec NX800 is a case that spends most of the money on the fans while cutting the cost out of the quality of the case. The payoff is a mixed bag when you look at the whole picture, where you can definitely see the benefits in places where it comes to like thermals, but it's got like a subpar exhaust fan and so many corners cut in other places. I wonder if just making the case slightly more expensive and correcting some of those inadequacies in a future revision would be a better call. If you were going to pick up this case for the fans, then I would look to replace the exhaust fan, and all in all know that you're going to be spending more time on cable management to help mitigate lack of rubber grommets that Antec has put in the case. Also, if you're choosing to go outside of the Antec fans included in the case, but you're going to keep the two 200mm fans that are installed, just know that you're going to need to plan, because you're going to need that little hub in the top left for the Antec fans, which is going to take up room, and then now you've got to plan for anything that might be an additional, especially if you're using like Corsair or Lee, which come with RGB fan hubs. So it could be a problem. Just be prepared. I mean, if you really want the NX800, I'm not going to say no to getting the case, but just know that you'll have some stuff to work around that is completely manageable, but actually may increase the cost of your build slightly. Anyway, guys, I'd love to know what you think about this case and the things that we talked about right up above. What's your feedback on the NX800? Is there something in there that I covered that was like surprising? Are you totally in for 200mm fans? Let us know all of that stuff down in the comments below. Now make sure while you're down there, make sure you slap that subscribe button with that like button and ring that notification bell so you get a notification each and every time we either go live or post a new video right here on YouTube. Anyway, guys, we hope you enjoyed the show and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.